Welcome back, everybody. You know, these technical things happen. Thanks for hanging in there with us. We are still here with Dr. Stacey Patton. We are talking about corporal punishment, spankings, and we're going to pick right back up where we left off. You know, Dr. Patton, you were in the middle of telling us about, is spanking a Black cultural tradition? Um, there are a lot of African Americans and Caribbean people. That was my upbringing. Being in a Caribbean plus African American family, certainly corporal punishment was on the table. And so, is it a Black cultural tradition?
Whooping a Black child is the whitest thing you can do to destroy your child, spiritually, intellectually, physically. It is not native to us. And I wrote about this in Spare the Kids. In order to understand the historical genesis and evolution of this practice within our communities, we don't begin in the American South with slavery. We don't begin with Black folks in the diaspora. You go back to Europe, to a culture of people who had been destroying children for thousands of years. The birthplace of corporal punishment, the sort of ritualistic violence against children. And so the degree to which Black people practice this tradition is a byproduct of colonization, enslavement, and indoctrination into a bastardized version of Western Christianity. We held children in different esteem in West African cultures, considering them gods, returned ancestors. We did not consider children to be property. We didn't practice childism, which is this idea that children are inferior, that you own them, that they need coercive, violent discipline. And in many other indigenous cultures around the world, they too did not practice this kind of ritualistic violence against children. So it's not native to us. It's a distorted gift from the people that we had a misfortune of coming into contact with and becoming victims of their oppressive behaviors.
One of the things that I read along the lines of exactly along the lines of what you're saying is as as we progress through the 1800s, the individuals who were kidnapped from Africa became younger and younger, especially as we came to the time of when the slave trade was about to be banned, because they wanted younger people who would age longer. And so, what role did that have in terms of not having a clear understanding of child rearing practices? If you were taken from your homeland and from your parents as a child, it seems like you would be more vulnerable to, new ways or things that were against your tradition of raising children.
I think that statement is true. Definitely, the majority of captives who ended up on those ships were young people in general. But as we get, as you said, closer to the 19th century with market demands, you have children who are, young as 8, 9, 10 years old, being bought over for specific labor practices. But what's true is that these people were taken from different countries, spoke different languages, came from different cultures, had different cultural conceptions about things like religion, about child rearing, food ways, all of those sorts of things. So these people didn't come here with a universal parenting guide that said things like, "Oh, when your child acts up, go get a switch and whoop them." That's not what happened. And so again, it's their seasoning process, breaking people to get them ready for this coercive system is where these, new ideas and new practices, begin to burgeon. And then, like when we think about religion, these people didn't speak English right away. It took a couple of generations for that to happen. So our natural ways of being, whether it's our foods, spiritual practices, and parenting, got distorted and perverted in order to help sustain this, slavery regime.
And before we go to the chat, because I'm sure there are some questions there, I wanted to say, can you maybe give us a little bit of background on how you decided personally to focus on corporal punishment in African American children and children in general? How did that become your passion?
So I was adopted by an African American family, middle class folks who lived in the suburbs. I was 5 years old when I came to live with them. And my adoptive mother was the first person to ever put her hands on me. And very early on, even before my adoption was legalized, I was whooped with belts, switches, hangers, all of those sorts of things. And at 5 years old, I never normalize this. She said it was love. It was to protect me from the white man, to make sure I'm obedient, that I didn't fall victim to the streets, that I didn't become a young girl who got pregnant, all of these different
Mhm.
rationale, but it didn't feel like love. It didn't feel like protection. And because she wasn't my real mama, that, made it, that was actually a protective factor for me so that I didn't grow up to become somebody who rationalized being hit. And so I ran away from home very early on, ended up in foster care, was lucky enough to get a full scholarship to boarding school and then on to college. And I
Mhm.
knew that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life, trying to convince, especially my people to let go of this, let go of masses, lash. And every
Right.
day I wake up and I look at these scars on my face from an extension cord beating from when I was 7 years old. And it's this fleshy
Oh.
braille that reminds me that I don't want any more kids to grow up experiencing that kind of pain and degradation that I went through.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I can tell from your passion, you are a true crusader. And from the first time I heard you speak, I was, just I already believed it, but I was mesmerized by everything that you had to say. And so I'm really glad that you're here tonight. And I would love now to go to the chat and see what some of the questions and comments are. So Bria and Wayne, if you could come on back on and let us know what's going on out there. Do people have questions?
Th-
Yes.
it's tough to get our questions back. Here's
Oh,
you take the first question, Bria.
Yeah, for sure. So the first question comes from Yvonne Smith. And the question is, how should parents discipline children under 7?
Okay,
great
so
question.
one of my big caveats I tell people is I'm not a parenting expert. I do not teach people how to raise their kids. I'm a child advocate, which means I fight childism and I advocate for children's rights. But there are tons of sites out there and programs like conscious parenting, gentle parenting, positive discipline, where you can go. They have free resources to help teach parents about child development, about brain development, because a lot of times people have unreasonable expectations for what their children can do because they don't realize that that part of the brain isn't even developed yet. So
Mhm.
that's part of the problem. Also, if you're hitting your child, you need some help. You need, if we had adults who were hitting each other, we'd say you need some anger management, right? And so parents need to do step one is figure out what their own triggers are, and think about the state of their own brain and their ability to regulate their emotions and get some therapy, because we can sit here and give people a 10 or 20 point plan of you need to do this and that if your child does X, Y, and Z, but if you don't know how to regulate your own nervous system, those tips aren't going to stick very well.
Wow,
Great points.
that's great. Here we go. Can you speak on body autonomy for young people?
So the way I see bodily autonomy, and because I don't agree with childism, is that I believe that children deserve to have the same rights to bodily autonomy as adults. The fact that it is a felony for adults, an adult to assault another adult or even an animal, but it's codified in law that children can be hit by their parents is a form of childism. So we don't respect children's bodily autonomy in this country. The fact that we have 19 states where it is still legal to hit kids in schools. It's still legal in every state except New Jersey and Iowa to hit children in private in charter schools. This
Wow.
country is the only country that has
Wow.
not signed on to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Child, because in that declaration says that children should be free from corporal punishment. So we have this guiding document, these guiding principles that this country that likes to say that it respects children hasn't even signed on to.
Wow.
Wow.
Incredible. So
Well, go ahead.
we have a question from Sharon Merkerson. How do you recommend effective discipline? Of course, yeah. How do you recommend effective discipline?
Well, it's so interesting to me. We would not say if the subject is men hitting women, beating their wives, their girlfriends, or vice versa.
We
Um,
can't even
we
joke about that.
we know nobody would be asking this question.
Right.
How do you tell men not to hit their significant others or vice versa? But we have to have this sort of discussion for adults with children. Once again, it's childism that we even have to have these kinds of discussions. But discipline means to teach, right? It means, so if you're hitting a child, what are you teaching them? People need to learn effective communication, to model behavior, to do the work of understanding how the brain works, to get to the why behind, these behaviors. And step one is therapy. If you're already hitting your child, you need therapy. The child is not the problem. The children are doing what is developmentally normal. So I hear parents all the time saying, "Oh, my child doesn't listen to me. They can't, I'm saying things over and over again and they're not listening to me." And then you ask them, "How old is your child?" "Oh, she's 2." And I'm like, hello, that part of the brain for listening, for prefrontal cortex is not developed yet. They're incapable of this. So it's a holistic approach that needs to happen to answer that question before we even get to the steps of discipline. There's work that parents need to do on their own bodies. They need to look back on their own childhoods and recognize that some of the things that were done to them was traumatic. It changed their brain chemistry. It rewired their brain. It messed with their ability to emotionally regulate, right? And so now they're parents and they're seeing their children's normal developmental behaviors and they're triggered by it because, oh, that child is climbing on that. When I was a kid, I would have got whooped. So they're often reacting to this stuff from their own childhood and then carrying it forward onto their own children. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to rewire people's brains.
Right.
Our cultural thinking about children as property. It's a lot of different layers to answer that question.
And I think you mentioned therapy, and I would also, it sounds like parenting classes as well, that parenting is not just an accident, it's a very intentional thing that you do. And that there are ways to do it which culturally we've been stripped of because of our history. And so sort of starting again from scratch and having the humility to start from scratch with therapy and with parenting classes as well.
Absolutely.
What else we have out there? Bria?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a longer question. So roll with me here. It says, I've taken the book Spare the Kids for a read to have something to do in between classes. And it has brought up interesting conversations, such as statements that say, I rebuke it in the name of Jesus. This is what is wrong with y'all young people. You get all this worldly stuff in your heads and don't honor your parents. How do you set boundaries and rules with people and create a safe space to talk about this topic? That's a good question.
Great question.
I think this podcast is a perfect example of that, creating spaces, particularly with us, to have these honest discussions. One of the things I do is a lot of community conversations. So I travel to cities like New Orleans and Chicago, Philadelphia, and we meet in churches, we meet in schools. I have these conversations in hair salons and barber shops,
Wow.
in the churches especially. And anytime I'm invited to have a radio discussion about this, it's an opportunity to shift, some people's mentalities around this. And, also we have to combat those statements, Bria, that people say, about young people, to combat these myths. So, for example, people will say, these kids today, are horrible. And it's usually from the people whose generation was on crack or, creating all kinds of sociological problems, right? It's always interesting to me, like people from the 80s, making these statements about millennials and Gen Zs, but the data don't bear it out. These children are drinking less, they're doing less drugs. Violent crime, juvenile crime has gone down. This generation is much more politically engaged, and we have to stop pretending like children give birth to themselves or raise themselves. If these kids are so horrible, it's because they had horrible parents raising them. These kids are products of their environments, and they're giving back to and mirroring back to us what we put into them. And it's
Wow.
if the kids are acting out, it's because they're traumatized. All that whooping, all that yelling, all that cussing out of kids, right? Shaming them on social media, just cutting off their eyebrows, all of that stuff, on top of what Dr. Mel was talking about with these viral videos of Black people being shot and killed, all the racism. It's a toxic stew that our young people are ingesting, the smog of white supremacy, and we're becoming co-conspirators in that process. And we wonder why these kids are so angry. So we have to get past the myths.
I, I
Well said.
that was incredible. That was an incredible statement. So much there, but I want to take it forward, not necessarily to small children, but in college, a lot of our young people are pledging fraternities and sororities. I'm a fraternity member. Okay, uh, both Dr. Mel and Bree are sorority members,
Yeah.
and and I my thinking has changed in how people should enter the fraternities. I mean, when you know better, you do better, right? How in some of the fraternities, this beating stuff is happening and still happening, like still happening. What's your thought process on that?
So
And
it's
that carrying
interesting.
on.
It's interesting you say that because I was just in a documentary with Byron Hurt, the filmmaker. He just got about 2 or 3 weeks ago, PBS aired his documentary called Hazing, and it is focusing on his time being hazed and him turning around and hazing, but talking about the deaths of people in fraternities and sororities, the cultural mindset around that, right? The historical roots of the practice. And it's a form of internalized racism. The people who are holding the paddles now and doing the branding and all of that sadistic violence are our own people, and it's something that needs to be purged from our culture. Again, it's the same ideology that we have in families who say, well, you got to struggle, you got to go through some pain, right? It's not going to kill you, it's going to make you stronger. Actually, it's messing up your internal wiring, your thinking, right? And then you want to pay it forward by continuing these cycles of violence. It's the exact same mentality, and we need to get rid of it.
Wow, Dr. Mel.
Wow, excellent question. Yeah. So, um, this has been amazing. There's one other thing that I wanted to get in, and you alluded to the disproportionate incarceration of Black men, and that being a reason why you know we have historically justified spanking at home so that you don't get arrested or beat by the police or taken to jail. What are the statistics around that? What is there any basis for that?
I always say that if whooping children was so successful at keeping Black people out of jail, keeping them safe from police brutality or being killed, then why do we keep having national conversations about police brutality? Why did we have a whole Black Lives Matter movement? What this says to me is that people don't understand the history of the carceral state, the rise of the carceral state, which began in the 19th century, that needed Black bodies, young and old, to feed, a racist capitalist system, right? If whipping children were a prerequisite for success in this country, then Black people should be ruling this country, quite frankly. But when we look at the data, so one of the things I hear parents say to me all the time, if I don't whoop my child, the police will kill them. So I actually aggregated some numbers from, police shooting databases from like the Washington Post. It's called Fatal Force. And it emerged during the Black Lives Matter movement. It tracked the numbers of Black people and white people, other groups who were killed by cops. And I believe from like 2000, I maybe have the dates wrong, but it's like a 5-year look. And what I found was that a total of 41 Black children were killed by cops during that time. Then I looked at the government's annual child maltreatment reports, which come out every single year. And during that same 5-year period, I found that over 2,000 Black children were killed as a result of maltreatment by their own parents. And so I don't say that in a Black on Black crime kind of way, like Fox News, but the reality is that Black children are more at risk of being assaulted, seriously injured, or killed by their own parents than the police. And we have to deal with those numbers, and a disproportionate number of the victims are Black boys, and the disproportionate number of perpetrators who kill Black children are Black women aged 40 and under. That's what the data shows us.
Wow. On that note, yeah, that is mind-blowing. And we have to wrap. I really want to thank you for being here. Really want to thank you for sharing all that wisdom, all that knowledge, your own story, covering everything from our history to our present.
We need to have you back. The chat is asking for a part 2.
So many questions.
Everybody's asking for a part 2.
Absolutely.
Well, I thank you for having this important public health conversation, because, we talk about racial disparities in health, but we don't talk enough about the childhood roots of that, the accumulation of stress and inflammation in the body due to whoopings, right? So
exactly.
Thank you.
And so that's a huge part of it. And so thank you to Bria and Wayne. Thank you to the audience for all the wonderful questions and comments. I can't wait to go back and read the ones that we didn't get to. And before we go, I have to remind everybody in my Be Health Empowered family that there's a special research study that's being conducted at Howard University to find out how you have been faring and getting through the COVID-19 pandemic. It's called the COVID-19 Resilience Study. It doesn't mean that you had COVID, whether or not you had COVID or not, just how have you dealt with all the stresses of the pandemic. So you can get reimbursed up to $100 for participating, and all you have to do is fill out 2 surveys. That's it. So if you have any interest, please reach out to Dana Harvey. And her email is danaharveyresearch@gmail.com. So that's DANA Harvey, HARVEY, research@gmail.com. Well, that's it for us, y'all. Thank you, my Be Health Empowered family, for joining. This has been another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. And until I see you again, remember, be wise, be well, and be health empowered.
So I guess I should thank the Robinsons. They invited me. They still don't know. I hooked up with Dave 3 days ago. He'll start coughing tomorrow. And I bet in 10 days he'll be on a ventilator. Now his wife, she's not vaccinated because she thinks it'll prevent her from being pregnant. But what they don't know is that I can decrease sperm count. Sorry, Dave. Good luck with that.